permission to speak. Shadows hide you. I am listening. Our paths converge.
So good to see you.
Hail to you. Never lose hope.
Here for a chat.
I hear you. It has only begun. Fight on, friend.
Welcome to episode 476 of Concede, our Hearthstone podcast dedicated to making the competitive side of the game more accessible to you. It is Thursday, December 12th, 2024 in the evening. Coming to you from Norrigan, Ohio, it's me, Edelweiss. From Northrend, Massachusetts, we have Wicked Good.
Hi.
From Teldrassil, California, we have Magesa.
Hello.
And from all around the world, we have you, dear listeners. This week's episode is brought to you by our producers, Number Theory, Kresh, Beef Squatch, David P., Walu, Jeremy T., Bottle Caps, Grumpy Monk, The Burger Club, Kirk Regan, Grizzly Bear, May, and SSJ5 Goku. And by our patrons of the week, Jim W. and TR Highlands. You can go to patreon.com/CoinConcede to get perks like a thank you at the top of the show, early access to new episodes, one-on-one coaching sessions, and help support the show in the process. If you would like to support the show but cannot do so monetarily, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your podcast feed of choice, as it always helps other people find the show. So, I, of course, had to go fast again so that, you guys don't get any ideas about just cutting me out. And I guess it did such a good job last week. But then I screwed it up anyway. So, yeah, it's been a minute. How's everybody doing? What have you been playing?
Well, it's no secret that I am a terrible, amoral person, as has been well established on the history of this show. So I felt no scruples about playing Dungar Druid to Legend this week. And I was the problem. And I continue to be the problem. But also I had like a 70% win rate with it when I was climbing. And nothing else, it wasn't even that nothing else was working, it's just that nothing else was appealing to me. Because everything else is either Swarm Shaman, which is just, I'm done, I don't need to do that anymore. Or it's hyper aggro, hit people in the face, because Dungar Druid is the other deck in the meta. So I figured, well, that's what I'm going to play. And I did, and it worked. And it's a stupid deck, and I hope they nerf the bejesus out of it. But until they do, I am abusing it until they do that, because it is a dumb deck. There is way too much ramp in that deck. It is way too consistent to find it. And Dungar bails you out really well, even if people are hitting you in the face the entire time. Like, if you miss one of the ramp spells and you can't Dungar on like 5 against aggro, sometimes you lose, but that doesn't happen as often as you might think that it does. You know, once you get Dungar down, I mean, some people have respect for their time and concede. Some people don't, and you play that out and it ends the same way. Like, if you get Dungar down early, it's just, it's Barnes, right? I mean, it's Barnes almost on the same turn that you used to play Barnes on. It's just 5 instead of 4, but yeah, it's just, you get Barnes down and then you kill people and it's fine. It's not the most fun deck in the world. It feels really stupid on the games when you just win, and everything goes right and you just ramp and high roll and win. But it's not every game. There are actual brain cells that have to be utilized occasionally. Though I did have, so going back to my Linkin Park obsession lately, I've been listening to their new album a lot. And one line that stands out for me is, "This is what you asked for. Heavy is the crown." because I was at lunch today. I was playing a couple games on my phone. I was about finished up with my pizza, and I'm like, I'll play one more, because they generally been going pretty quick. Because those games are over pretty quickly. Either you get Dungar early and you wipe them out, or you get blown out, right? Like, there's not really a lot of in between, especially the way that the meta has been shaping out. But I ran into another Druid. And this Druid was not another Dungar Druid, because those games are generally pretty quick. It's one person gets Dungar and one person doesn't, and the person who gets Dungar wins. Like, that's generally how those go. This was not that. This was an armor Druid who really wanted to make a game of it. And it was about 10 minutes before the end of the game where we both had portals open, Kill Jaden portals open at the same time. Those are dumb games. I yogged their starship. They made another starship, and I couldn't yog the second one, unfortunately. But I eventually did get an Illidari Inquisitor eventually, and that was enough to end the game. But they were just like, oh, Magesa, you would hate it. There was so much trading, so much trading, because like there were just taunts everywhere. Everything was a taunt, so. It's just, you have to trade through their taunts, and maybe you get to hit for like 3 with whatever's left over.
Taunt is an appropriate name for this keyword for me. It's just taunting me like, yeah, you can't go face. You have to hit me.
Yeah. And it was just so many taunts. And they just kept coming back, and like multiple Unchiliaxes and hydration stations to bring back more Unchiliaxes. And There was an Archimond at one point that was summoning more taunts, and because there's like the 8-drop like one that drops the 2/4/4 taunts, and there's Eridar Brutes, and it's so many taunts. I was nearly late getting back from lunch. I only got it back to the office on time because I made the decision to start walking and playing on the way back.
Oh, goodness.
Which was not a great experience, but I won. So, because I wasn't giving them the satisfaction. Like, I have standards. So, yeah. So, that's pretty much most of the Hearthstone has just been Dungar Druid. I did play some new Battlegrounds. I played a few games of that. Like, enough to clear the quest this week. It's fun. I'm still kind of learning what everything is. Though I will say that whatever the undead is doing has way too many things that poop out other things when they die, and it takes like way too long. It's just like death rattles that summon 3 other death rattles, and those have reborn, and then they just keep summoning more death rattles, and then the death rattles summon death rattles, and it's just like you get back to your turn, you have like 30 seconds left because it took that long for everything to summon. So I think we're still in the phase where they have the extended turn times because it's the post refresh set, so it's going to get even worse if they don't. Maybe they'll do something about it, maybe they don't. I don't keep up on Battlegrounds balance, but hopefully they do something about that.
You could be talking about the space rock in the Dungar deck, and it's the same thing. It's just
it never goes away. It's 8 power on the board forever.
It's death rattles all the way down.
But that doesn't steal your time. Well, I guess it does steal your time because the whole deck is stealing your time. I guess that's a different way of looking at it. I should shut up now. But yes, Dungar Druid is good. Please don't play it. Be better than me. That's all I'm saying.
Maybe you will. Maybe you will be braver than Wicked and actually play the Reno Priest that was in today's Vicious Syndicate report.
Yeah.
I sent it to Wicked, and he sent me back Charlie Brown trying to hit the football, and we see.
I've been here before. I've seen this movie and I know how it ends.
Well, I don't know about Reno Priest, but I did have a thought, because of course I despise Dungar Druid, that what if I played some Reno Shaman? And so I tinkered around with building that to specifically target the Druids. No, you're not necessarily amazing against Shamans and some of the other aggressive decks. You can be okay. Like, you've still got Baking Soda Volcano and Frosty Decor, that kind of stuff. But, it's Reno, right? So inconsistency. But I had a great time every time I encountered a Druid, and could just hex their space rocks or MC Tech their Ziliax. I wasn't even actually running MC Tech initially, and then Wicked actually suggested it, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that instead of Yogg, because Yogg is always too late.
Do you have Finley in there too?
Oh yeah, Finley was the impetus for building this. Right?
That must be so satisfying.
Yeah, in retrospect, you don't have to be Reno to do Finley, but if things do go late, then Reno is nice as another proof. So Yeah, very satisfying. And the one-sided clears are really the ace in the hole, right? Like, it's nice to be able to steal a Ziliax or hex various things that otherwise have complicated death rattles, like Thunder, what's it?
Thunderbringer?
Thunderbringer, yeah. But the real kick in the teeth against them is, they play a hydration station, and they only have the one rush in Ziliax, if they even are able to get Ziliax back. So if you then Finley them or Reno them or whatever and get to just punch through, it's very, very satisfying. So I enjoyed that. Definitely one of those buyer beware sort of situations. But
I mean, I guess it's a matter of, if your level of spite for Druid is as high as Edel's, then this is a good deck for you. If not, if you're trying to climb, maybe put your spite in check, and because fear leads to anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. So
but the deck code is already this time in the show notes, so if you are that person, it is there, we promise.
How about you, Magesa?
Well, I didn't play a ton earlier in this week. I was helping my husband, who has moved on from Elemental Mage to Handbuff Paladin, because that was actually one of the decks that they give you, or the choice that you can make, and he just picked the first one. But it happened to be Handbuff Paladin, and I said, well, good choice. Done good. It's definitely a little bit of a shift for him, because it's less just straight aggressive. I was helping him with the replay, and I was like, actually, we need to hold here for a big, Leroy finish. So, don't play anything this turn. And he was like, what do you mean? Why are you telling me to not play anything this turn? I mean, I was like, play something, but, hold back the outfit tailors, hold back to this. We have to punch through all at once. But he's been making a lot of progress with that. Sometimes when he's actively, he'll, view replays with me, but when he's actively playing, he's like, don't look. They'll start telling me things.
You kind of created a monster here, because he's more aggressive than you are somehow.
I have, yes. I was really, my mother-in-law was in town, so we went out to brunch with her, and she heard that he had gotten into the game, and she was like, oh no, you are both competitive people. This is not good. But,
well, as long as you're not competing, this is what I learned with Maureen. As long as you're not competing against each other, it's fine, right? It's fine for you both to be competitive if you're helping each other and going, or you're helping him and going in the same direction. It's fine. When she and I played Risk in college, there were regularly tiers in that play group, not necessarily hers, but there were regularly tiers in that play group. So yeah, that's where you have to be a little bit more careful.
Yeah. So. But then I did play yesterday, today. I was sitting there going, I don't know why this climb is so hard. And it's a few hours before the show, I sent a really salty post to Wicked and at all of it. I can't even climb an 11x. What is this? The queue times are long because everyone's made it to Legend before me, which is not true, actually. But I was feeling salty. And the queue times were long because it was a weird time to be playing. But complaining appeared to be a valuable strategy, because as soon as I got that off my chest, I just started winning and hit Legend. And then I realized that the climb had been really hard because I came in at 400. So I was like, no wonder.
Do not expect to replicate this behavior, listeners.
Yes. This is along the lines of that one Reddit post years and years ago, where the guy ate a bunch of hot dogs and then he hit Legend, and the TLDR was eat hot dogs, get Legend. Don't do that either. That's also not good. That also will not be good for your heart. Just like being salty will not be good for your heart.
I would say, from all of my other experience, if we did an actual correlational study, I don't think we would find saltiness leading to win rate on average. And also, as we know, correlation does not imply causation, which if you ever took any class with stats in it, your professor said a million times, really annoyingly, including me. That's been me as the teacher. But I don't know. It worked this time. And I am pleased that I was, of course, just playing Zarimi, because it's good right now. Is it, Of course, the Vicious Syndicate reports there's no reason to play Zaremi when you could play Swarm Shaman. There is if you're me, because it's a priest deck. That's why we play it instead of Swarm Shaman. But anyway, that's basically my week.
All right. Well, we've got a little bit of news. We got some tournament previews, given that we have one of the casters on the show, not a guest, just Edel, casual Worlds caster host Edel. And so we're going to talk about some Worlds playlists, and then, I guess we're going to talk about channeling that salt into aggressive play, into a healthy salt. I don't know. Is that like Mrs. Dash? Is that what that is? I don't know. Anyway, that's, but let's talk about some news first.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
Okay, so we had a surprise client update this week. Not a planned patch, but I guess it was probably planned from the team's perspective, but not something on the normal cadence. But this came through on Tuesday of this week, which was intended to address a lot of the client stability issues. So there have been a number of issues with disconnects related to Titans and Choose One cards that were pretty prevalent. Like if you mulliganed away a Titan or a Choose One card and then you attempted to play it when you later drew it, the client would disconnect, which, by the way, I just mentioned it, but just to drive the point home, we have a World Championship this weekend. So that kind of needs to be fixed, because we've had Masters Tours with those kinds of bugs in just the spectator client, and it was disruptive. I can't even imagine what it would be like if it was in the actual client. So the team got that all cleared away in this patch. So there was actually which is not usual for this type of an update, a note from Nathan Lyon-Smith, who's the executive producer of Hearthstone, saying client stability is incredibly important to us. Issues that take you out of the game, sometimes literally, are fun killers that understandably lead to a lot of frustration. We just released a client update to patch 31.2, a new version of the last major update, intended to resolve the highest profile issues hurting your play experience. It's available now on desktop and will be available on mobile devices once approved by their respective source fronts. Editor's note, it's all there now. We expect a marked improvement in performance after this patch, and we hope it'll let you return to the relationship you have with the client when it's working well, not really noticing it at all. You might have also seen that we introduced a new server disconnect indicator, the little red circle in the bottom left part of your screen, so that your client can tell you when you're not connected to the game servers faster. With today's patch, we also improved our automatic reporting for desktop device crashes. As a live service game, we want you to know that we see this as a continuous effort. Keep letting us know when things aren't working right. Your reports were a big help in tracking down the issues resolved in this patch. So I actually didn't know before this patch note that disconnect indicator had been added. So that's actually good to know. So if you are suspecting that you're no longer connected to the client, you want to look in the lower left corner and see if there's a red dot. And if there is, then quit out. You may want to Alt F4, because we've had problems with that too. I think they say
that
they
one
fixed
is
that.
Fixed. Yeah,
they fixed that,
fixed.
But Alt F4 anyway. Just it's faster. But it's fewer clicks, right? It's one button press as opposed to having to go through menus. But if you see the red dot, then you want to quit out and then rejoin as quickly as you can, and hopefully you can get in before the turn passes. And that was the main bug fix. There was a fix to Twist where pasting a deck code while missing some of the cards from your collection could cause a soft lock. So that's also an unpleasant experience. And there are some other things around redeeming Battlegrounds tokens or using Battlegrounds tokens. There was a memory issue that was causing crashes. There was a visual bug where the disconnect indicator would appear at the end of each game, because technically you had disconnected from the game server because the game had ended. So they got rid of that. And they also fixed a kind of not a non-crash bug that was affecting the rewards track, where it would always open to page 3 and the Battlegrounds rewards track would always open to page 1. So now it should be opening to where you are in the track and not making you scroll through the entirety of the rewards track every time that you go to claim one of your clicky homeworks. So that is very good. Bob's holiday bash event is live. That's the one where you can earn the bartender reward as well as the packs. The first quest is, if you're not prepared for it, could seem like a shocker, because what is it? It's play 30 games and wins count twice.
Yeah.
So and Magesa has helpfully put in the show notes that it requires 20 games at a 50% win rate, which is still a lot of games, but this quest line is intended to take you through the end of the month. So just ignore the quest and play Hearthstone and try to win, which you're going to do anyway. And you should get through it. Like, it's going to take you a little while. It's intended to. It's fine. You will get, if you are playing regularly and paying any amount of attention to the quest, you will almost certainly finish it before the end of the month. So don't worry about how scary big the quests look. Just play the game and the quests will work out.
Also, the important reward on this track is the first one. Right. So even if you just do a few dailies, you will get Bob.
Yeah.
Now, if you want him golden, which of course, he's very shiny golden, then you need to get through a lot more of it. But if you just want Bob, that's the first reward on the track.
Yeah. And very likely, if you just lose your internet for the next 3 weeks, they just did this with Champions of Azeroth, where after the event was over, and again, I don't know anything, I'm just connecting the dots. But after the event was over, they changed it so that the next time you opened up a pack from, I forget which set, or it might have just been anything from this year, that you would just get granted copies of Champions of Azeroth. So very likely after this event is over, they will do the same thing with Bob. I would be surprised if they don't. So, don't stress it too much. Just play the video game, and the things will arrive. Just like Gandalf, it will arrive neither early nor late. It will arrive exactly when it intends to. So, as we've said, the Masters Tours this weekend, we're going to talk about the deck list and Decksplanations. The main thing that you want to know is, first of all, timing. That if you're watching us live, this will be more relevant. The event may be over by the time you're hearing this on the podcast, though I'm going to try to get this out earlier this weekend, so hopefully you'll have a chance to hear this and then go watch the Hearthstone World Championships. And again, I think I said this last week, but please do watch it. First of all, to support Edel, who's casting it, but also so that we hopefully get more of these, because they do pay attention to the viewer numbers. But the tournament will be starting Friday, December 13th at 7 a.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m. Central Eastern Time and 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And that's going to be all 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's going to be group play on day 1 and day 2, and then top 8 with single elimination on day 3. You can watch it on either Twitch or YouTube. The important thing is on Twitch, there will be drops for 6 packs that are going to be available from the Great Dark Beyond. You get 2 each day, so you're encouraged to watch it on all 3 days. So I'm not sure how long you have to watch in order to get those packs. Usually when they're doing that, it's a little bit longer, but you should still, even if you tune in midday, you should still be able to get them. Even if you aren't able to watch it the whole day, if you just leave it running in a browser, you will get credit for the packs. So please, go ahead and just make sure that you're getting those, because, who doesn't want free packs and who doesn't want to support Hearthstone esports?
I have a quick note, which is,
yes.
If people, just very selfish here, if people just want to show up and watch me, I will be casting Group A Match 2, Group B Match 1. That's on day 1. Group C Match 2 on day 2. And Group D Match 2. And then for the final day, I will be casting Match 3 of the quarterfinals and Match 5, which is the first semifinal match. So that's my schedule.
Could we tell you what times those are going to be? No.
No.
That's not how tournaments work.
That's not how tournaments work. But, so if you tune in all day, then you'll be sure to see Edel when she's casting. That's
all we can say is that it begins at 10 a.m. Eastern or 7 Pacific. I think that's
Yes.
right.
Yeah. Or
Yes.
4 Central European. Yeah.
Yes. And there are no control priest mirrors, so we should be safe. But I guess that is as good as the segue as we're going to get to go talk about the deck list. So let's do that.
It's the grand tournament!
So there might be a little bit of variation between what I'm looking at for mass breakdowns and what's in H's Guru, but I have basically that overall there are, Shaman is the most broad class, 14 of 16 players, with 10 Swarm Shaman, 3 Big Shaman, 1 Asteroid. Rogue next at 9 Cycle Rogue and 2 Starship Rogue. Hunter is third, which I'm sure CDC is thrilled about. 7 Discover Hunters and 1 Starship Hunter, followed by Demon Hunter, 4 Pirate, and 3 Attack. It's possible that those are reversed. I'm not sure who's correct. 6 Rainbow DKs, 6 Dungar Druids, and then Paladin has a unusual spread of 3 Linessa, 2 Hand Buff, and 1 Pipsy. There are 3 Armor Warlocks and 2 Control Warriors. So it seems as though there are a few strategies at play here. There are some full aggro lineups, quite fitting for today's discussion. They are targeting, presumably, the Dungar Druids and the Cycle Rogues. And to some extent, perhaps the Starship Rogues. Rogue can often bend under the pressure of a full aggro lineup. And then there's sort of the more controlling stuff that is hoping to counter those full aggro lineups. People who brought those Armor Warlocks, Control Warrior, Rainbow DK. Although there's kind of a spread, right? Swarm Shaman, I think, is the one that's kind of deemed as like, well, this is sort of the best deck, right? So it appears the most in 10 lineups and can often beat other aggressive decks. One of those. But in addition to some of those target strategies, it feels like some folks have just brought sort of what they deem to be a best deck lineup, right? Fury Hunter with the mix here of Discover Hunter, Pirate DH, Swarm Shaman, but also Dungar Druid.
It's interesting to me that the 2 players that didn't bring Shaman are both from China, and all of the Armor Warlocks are from China.
The lineups, except for Wu Wansu, and my pronunciation is going to be terrible, I apologize, who brought a pretty aggressive lineup. Some of the other Chinese players like Pro Yun, who brought Control Warrior, Armor Warlock with like Wheel and the ETC, a Cycle Rogue with Incendius, and a really slow Discover Hunter. Like it can do an infinite fizzle thing with Rangari Scout and ETC. So
yeah.
Hopefully you're not casting that one and then it goes to the turn timer.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
about as close to a priest mirror as you're going to get in this tournament, I think.
I did my checks from the deck breakdown overview, and then looking more closely, kind of surprised to see actually Rainbow DKs are not in the same lineups as the Armor Warlocks and Control Warriors. It seems to be a mostly China thing that's on the control train. With slower Discover Hunters, or in the case of one of them, a slower Discover Starship Hunter. I guess, I mean it's Starship in the sense they have Biopod and Arcanite Defense Crystal. They're not running the 3-cost one, which kind of makes sense to me. Those are sort of the most important ones. But Cycle Rogue, I would not anticipate being in sort of your slow or control lineup. But I suppose if that's one of those decks where if you just have confidence with it, you feel like it can beat anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's a typical rogue, right? Like a rogue that's going to see play in a world championships. Like it's the kind of thing that if you can play it, and again, not everybody can. Like usually the reason that you don't bring that deck is not because you think the matchups are bad. It's because you don't feel confident enough in your play of that deck to be able to pilot it in a world championships. Because typically those kinds of decks can beat anything or feel like they can beat anything. And even the stats don't really matter at this level because you're really talking about each individual pilot's skill with the deck at that point, which may or may not be at the same, have the same spread as the overall, like when an average player gets their hands on the deck. I would imagine the win rates are going to be a lot lower across the board for Cycle Rogue than they would be in the hands of any of these 16 players or the ones who brought it at least. So I think that's the kind of thing, like you have to have a reason to not bring it. And the reason to not bring it is I don't feel comfortable playing this deck and being able to win with it.
Yeah, there's a certain amount for, but certainly for players who are like less experienced in tournaments, we always say, the main thing is bring decks that you're comfortable with. But to some extent, that's true even at the highest levels. You're going to have players who are more confident with a really wider range of decks. But if you are really like one of the top players on a certain type of deck, then maybe it's just worth bringing because you can beat the stats on it because you're really, really good at it. We'd see that with something like Pocket and Naga Mage. It was a good deck in the stats, but it was also a better deck when Pocket was playing it than when most other people were playing it.
When you look at the actual assemblage of 4 decks, right, between lineups, it feels like people just have, like, there are some full aggro lineups, and that is pretty clear. But a lot of them, it seems as though people are just kind of at varying amounts of disagreeing on what is the best. What is the best grouping of 4?
Yarla has Pirate Demon Hunter and Swarm Shaman, but also Dungar Druid and Pipsy Paladin.
Right.
Yeah. And Yarla is the one player who is probably most likely to go on a control lineup if such a thing existed. Right? Because, I mean, that's just his play style for the most part, is like slower control decks. So the fact that he's running a Pirate Demon Hunter kind of tells you that there isn't really a control lineup. I mean, I guess the China players disagree with that because they clearly are trying to find one. But I think that like the thesis I would expect when you're going into this tournament is like, do I ban Shaman or not? Right? That's kind of where your whole conversation needs to start. Because if I think I can beat Shaman and I can target it, then I'll leave it up. Right? Otherwise, I'm going to ban it and then try to find the best lineup that I have against everything else. Now, I think it feels to me like the Chinese players think they can beat Shaman.
Definitely. I mean, it is only Chinese players that have brought Control Warrior. It is only Chinese players that have brought Armor Warlock, and none of them brought Swarm Shaman. The 2 that brought Shaman, one is on... one of them
Wu
brought Swarm
Yansu brought Swarm Shaman, but
one of them
even
brought Swarm Shaman.
Yeah, but even HU...
The other brought
HUY,
Asteroid.
brought Asteroid Shaman. So, and I think that, like, I guess the thought process is, that the 2 decks, I guess if you're going to look at 2 decks, right, you can ban one. You either have Shaman or you have Rogue, right? Because those are probably what you're going to ban. Like, Dungar Druid is the kind of thing you could try to target, but that's kind of more of a gamble. But like, there is no more consistent thing in Hearthstone than World Championship players bringing a Rogue deck to World Championships. Like, that is, if there is a complicated Rogue deck and there's a Masters Tour or World Championship, it is going to be in nearly every lineup. And Swarm Shaman was kind of a shoe-in. So it's like, which one am I banning and which one am I targeting? So if you're targeting Cycle Rogue, you probably want to get under them, right? Which is what it seems like a lot of these lineups are doing. If you're targeting Shaman, you're probably going to want to try to outlast it, which is what the Chinese lineups are attempting to do.
Yeah. And I think that this Rogue has an incredible amount of burst potential. Like, it can be really unexpected when they just pivot from giants to instead I'm going to Shadow Step Incendious and then reduce it with Sandbox Scoundrel Mini so that it costs 1 so that you can Sonya Incendious, right? Oh. It's kind of crazy that we've even devolved to the point of 6 is not a safe mana cost if things are slow enough, because you can, wombo combo of, play, step, and then the following turn do the discount by 3 to get it down to 1 and Sonya it, right? So you've got 15 of them. And Ethereal Oracle just boosts the power of Incendious for any deck that would consider running it. Right? We see even the Lanessa Paladins have Incendious because Ethereal Oracle is in every deck. And since it draws specifically spells, you can be pretty likely to pull those eruptions. And once you pull one, that's a free draw, then you start getting a random chance of, like, do you hit more eruptions? I have not checked. I would assume that eruptions don't cast twice if you have Lanessa out. I think it's just like extra damage.
Yeah, I don't, because you're not casting them, right?
Right.
So,
but if you are putting out an Oracle to use with your O Managers or Holy Glow Sticks anyway, and then you can also get Incendious Eruptions, why not? Yeah, it's going to be a pretty wacky Worlds. I can't say I've really seen a spread like this before. It sort of looks a little all over the place.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of a function of the fact that we just haven't had tournaments. And I know this was the case last year, right? But like, because there are no other tournaments going on, like there weren't even any exhibition tournaments or anything, right?
Right.
There's no real consensus as to like what the best decks are. Like in the old days, right? Like we would have had a whole bunch of other tournaments going on and you'd have some idea of like what the best lineup is. And now there's just like, it's wide open. And also bringing China back into the mix is bringing a little bit more variety that we've been missing, right? Because the Chinese players are the ones that are disconnected from the rest of the scene for a number of different reasons, right? And they kind of march to the beat of their own drummer. And like, you can tell that like, if you took China out of this field, the 12 decks would look 12 lineups would look a lot more similar, because that's like one entire other class, 2 entire other classes that wouldn't have any representation if not for China, Warrior and Warlock.
Yeah.
So that being the case, I think that's a really good thing for the tournament to just kind of inject a little bit more of that variety and that kind of creativity that we've come to expect from the Chinese players. And they're hungry because they haven't been able to compete in a couple of years. So it's going to bring a very interesting dynamic to this year's tournament.
I think it also shows how just the meta in general, even the ladder meta, is somewhat determined by like what happened to develop. Like I'm pretty sure that like Chinese ladder and the other ladders have some differences in like what's popular to play and stuff like that. Obviously there is some sharing of stats, but metas get solved partly based on what people have happened to experiment with and refine. And then when you haven't had tournaments, you haven't had a chance to refine what's good in tournaments, which, as we always say every time there's a tournament, don't necessarily just pick a list out of a tournament lineup because that's made for a different meta, but it's not one that people have been able to watch and see what works. So they're just having to guess to some extent.
And there could be, smaller things to pocket metas. It is 2 South Korean players who have brought Hand Buff Paladin, which is sort of the deck you wouldn't expect to see in Worlds, except it is the ultimate tech card deck because you just make big things and then run Razor Scale and Cult Neophyte and Speaker Stomper.
Yeah. Which, I mean, is pretty good into Cycle Rogue, if that's what you're targeting, right? I mean, if you're targeting Cycle Rogue and you can make their stuff stop costing 1, that's pretty good. That works out pretty well.
Both of those players did not bring Cycle Rogue.
Yeah. They're because they are civilized. So it's going to be an exciting tournament. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's been a minute since we've had Tournament Hearthstone, especially Worlds, is always a hell of a ride. And this looks like it's going to be one of the more interesting fields that we've had in a long time. So it's going to be a fun. I'm not just hyping that up to make you watch Edel this weekend, but you should watch Edel this weekend. But even if not, I think there's going to be some really exciting Hearthstone. And usually this is an opportunity if you're trying to improve your game. Watching and paying attention to the commentary is one of the best ways to understand what these players are looking at that you're not, right? And kind of give you an idea of what kinds of things to pay attention to and how to improve your game by watching some of the lines that they take. So go into it with that mindset as well.
Yeah. And even if you are listening to this after the weekend, you can't get your Twitch drops from watching the VODs, but you can still watch the VODs, and this still has that sort of educational value to it that I've always found. It was really the first part of the Hearthstone community that I engaged with that kind of helped teach me some of the terminology and some of the strategy of card games with stuff that, I wouldn't have figured out on my own.
And one part of that is that those players will not waste damage. So why don't we teach you and have Magesa teach you how to not waste damage by hitting people in the head?
All right. So, and I actually want to say on the record, this was Wicked's idea, not my idea to have this Decksplanations.
Don't. I have a reputation. Stop that. I'm trying to cultivate an image. You're ruining it.
I apologize. I'm sorry, but I would do it again. Yeah. So
that's my line. Like, now what are you doing? What are you doing to me?
That is also your line. Now I'm just the rogue player, apparently. So the topic for now is playing proactive and especially aggressive decks, but I actually wanted to start with the spiel that Wicked had added to the end, which was, what if you don't play aggro? It says, but Magesa, I'm a degenerate control player and none of this applies to me. So Wicked, why should you not just stop listening to the show right now?
Well, because you can actually, hear me out. You can actually hit people in the face when you're playing control. It is a thing you're allowed to do. And it is occasionally even correct to do that. So as I said in this spiel, it applies even if you're a terrible person with exquisite taste, such as myself. Because you are sometimes the beatdown, even when you're playing a control deck. Like, there are some decks that are slower than you, or sometimes you get into control mirrors and one person is going to have to be the aggressor in order to end the game, because otherwise the other person's going to stabilize and they're going to end up running you out of resources. So being able to recognize that and take advantage of those opportunities, there are games where you are the control player, but also you can just play big things and just hit them, and it's okay. And I think this was probably Ridiculous Hat who has put this in my brain, and it's become even more ingrained in my head as I've been playing more Commanders, that player removal is the most efficient kind of removal. So if you can end the game, then all their scary stuff goes away and you don't have to trade it away anymore. It can't hurt you after that. So sometimes player removal is the control strat. But also, like, the way that a lot of control decks are built and the way that a lot of decks are built in general is that you really can't play an attrition game, a pure attrition game anymore. That hasn't been the case for a couple years now, where you could just like play priest and remove everything and wait for them to lose their will to live and then pass out in front of the keyboard. Like, that doesn't really happen as often as it used to, because there are just so many ways for things to get replayed or resurrected or shadow stepped. Yes, I'm saying the S word. Or just generating that much value that can really run you out of a game if your entire game plan is just to remove and not have any sort of a proactive plan. So being able to play, not necessarily aggressively, but certainly proactively, is a skill that even as a degenerate control player, is valuable and something that will help you win more games of Hearthstone, even if it feels distasteful and uncivilized.
And one thing that you had noted was even if a control deck relies on a big damage combo to get lethal, the more chip damage you get in early, the less math you need to do late.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to do less math when they're playing, right? So
I teach math and I still want to do less math. All right, so with that said, the first note that I have here, and this is the fastest I have ever written such a thorough decks list. I'm not going to read all of this, but
you've been training your entire life for this moment.
I have. If you would like a written guide to playing proactively, it is in the show notes. I actually already had a draft of this idea in my notes app, so that made it very easy. I started keeping it a few years ago when I was doing coachings with Hat, and I wanted to do what I always tell my students to do, which is like write down the main points so that you remember it. Usually just the act of writing it down helps you remember it, but also then now it actually turned out to be useful because I come back to it. So first thing, just kill him faces the place. That is the thesis of today. Every point of damage counts. What damage can you do now to have lethal later? So like if I miss lethal by 1 damage, it might be just that there was no way that I could have gotten that extra 1 damage. But sometimes I will go back and look at the replay and be like, well, where did I miss a damage? Because especially when you're playing a more proactive deck, but even pretty much any deck, if it doesn't have just like oodles more damage than it could ever need, every point can win you the game or win you the game more quickly. You know, with my husband playing Handbuff Paladin, I was telling him to slow down a bit, but I was also saying you need to count your, you can have lethal like 3 turns before you think you do, before it's obvious. Right? Especially if you got that early damage in. And it's a balancing act. If you're playing a deck that's getting its damage through the board, which is most aggro decks, and a lot of, clearly with their design philosophy these days, whether or not it's what you agree with or not, but they've been pushing the board-based gameplay. So if you have a board-based deck or a sort of hybrid board-based and then some over-the-top to finish deck, it's about balancing the board control while going face. So I think the first thing a lot of people learn, unless you're my husband, when you're playing Hearthstone, is value trading. And that's a good skill to recognize when you can keep your minions and then they don't get their minions. And that's a fairly straightforward thing to look at, or one of the first skills that takes a bit of time to develop that people tend to develop. But another type of board control is make your board awkward for them and then make them deal with it. Right? You can't always do this. And it is, I think, part of why people tend to think aggro decks are just play the green card, but it's like which green card, and then how you have all these cards now on the board, where do you run them in? You want to be pushing as much damage as possible, making them trade if possible. So really it's, instead of needing a reason to go face, you need a reason not to go face. You sit there and ask yourself, how do they punish me if I go face? Right? Are they going to completely get control of the board if I go face and I'll never get it again because they have a Divine Shield minion and it's going to boot me off and then I don't have my clergy and then I'm just doomed? Or are they going to just make this exact trade that I'm thinking about right now? In which case, don't do it. Go face. What type of board do they have? Is it a warrior and it's early? Maybe think about, if I have one little guy here, then Blade Storm's awkward for them. You can't necessarily play around every single thing all the time, but just thinking about what's a likely clear and what would make it a little awkward for them. And if you have the collection for it and a particular deck is giving you a lot of trouble, play that other deck and you will quickly become obvious to you how it loses.
And I can tell you, as just from the perspective of someone who usually plays control, there are 2 questions that I'm asking myself as a control player fairly consistently throughout each match. One is, can I die this turn? And the other is, do I need to care about this board? The answer to 1 leads to the answer to 2, right? So the lower your health total, the more you have to care about every board that's presented to you, and the more you need to find a way to clear it. And that means that you are not spending time developing your own game plan. So you can't flip the board and then start taking control of the game if you are constantly on the back foot and having to react, and every board is threatening lethal. And the way you get there is by doing the early damage so that the later boards can threaten lethal with every board. And you're forcing them to have not just have one removal, you're forcing them to have successive removals. And believe it or not, control decks do run out of removal. It happens. It happens to me plenty. Watch my stream ever. You will see it happen repeatedly.
And, you know, one thing that you often try and do if you are a slower deck is you will put out some minions in the early game, utility things that you are just getting some value for, just kind of putting something out there to contest, right? In most circumstances, they are happy if the aggro deck trades with those minions. It's pretty much only if the aggro deck needs to protect one particular minion that gets in superior damage compared to the rest, or is buffing the rest, like a South Sea Captain or something, or
Ziliax.
Hosen. Right, or Ziliax. If you don't have something to protect, you're often going to be better served just sort of letting them make the trades while you go face, because there's a very real possibility that they were planning on playing a board clear that is going to clear their side of the board too anyway. And in that circumstance, you have just lost damage by sinking into the minion that they played, because they were going to lose it regardless.
You should think of, if you're trading, you are giving up damage as an investment. So you should know what you're investing for. So if you're protecting your Ziliax, it's because you think that then next turn you're going to be able to send everybody face, and that's going to be like +6 damage. Like I'm giving up 2 damage from this Miracle Salesman to trade into something to protect my Ziliax, because it's going to be like 4, 5, 6 damage next turn. It needs to... Right, you're doing that because you kind of know what you're protecting or what extra damage you're going to get, and you think it's likely that that's going to happen. The more your minions don't go face, the more likely your minions are to never go face. Yeah, and I've gotten into games like this where I'm like, I'm going to protect this particular minion, so I like keep trading to wait until I have the right board to go face. Like, that's usually not the right plan. Usually, as long as you are able to have some reload, right, or you even sometimes a minion that you normally want to protect, you have to think about, like, at what point do I stop worrying about protecting it? At what point is it not giving me more damage in the long run? So, like, if I'm playing Zarimi, the 2/3 Whelp Wrangler, I would prefer that live, and sometimes I trade to protect it. But it depends on whether I really need those 1/2 dragon taunts or not. Do I need them for Zarimi in this game, or do I already have plenty of dragons? Is it something, and then, are those 1/2 taunts allowing me to do more damage because they are having to trade into that? They can't get my big things and the rest of my stuff is going face. If so, then I'm going to protect the 2/3. If not, then, like, they'll trade it off. Oh, well, I have more cards to play behind it. And yeah, don't generally trade into the utility stuff that a control deck plays, because they're thrilled when you do.
And even as a control deck, right? Like, if you have a taunt and they have a bunch of small things, just hit them. It's fine. They're going to have to, unless you know that there's a way that they can, like, unless they're on like 10 mana, they could yog it or whatever. Right. But, like, if you're sitting there with a taunt and they have like a bunch of small minions that are going to trade the taunt off, then let them trade the taunt off, hit them in the face, get the damage. Right. It still matters. If they're going to trade off the taunt anyway, you don't need to help them. You're just giving up free damage at that point.
I have a list here of reasons why you would need to trade. 1, obviously, you're going to die. You have to trade. 2, they played something that really needs to die, and you don't have lethal this turn. Do make sure you check whether you have lethal this turn before you trade off the Gold Panna or the Sonya or the whatever it is that really needs to die, because I cannot tell you how many times I have missed lethal because first I killed the thing that needed to die, and then I realized that I was 3 damage off lethal, and I put 3 damage into Sonya. So don't be me. the return on damage investment, or your opponent is the beatdown in the game and you have fallen back to a plan B power spike, where you what helps you get there is to get rid of their stuff. So that's like a very specific situation, right? If I know that, to use Zarimi again as an example, because that's what I've been playing, if I've really fallen back to the like ceaseless Zarimi plan, which is not usually, and I'm at low health, then I really start trading, because that's my plan to win the game. I am no longer the beatdown. I am now the control. But in general, go face, unless you have a reason not to go face, even as control. And I've started to say this, but my next main point was never stop counting damage, which not only helps you not miss lethal, it helps you not miss chip damage, and set up multi-turn lethals, put your opponent on a clock. As Wicked was saying, if your opponent is low health, that limits their options, even if they're not dead. You do want to, Hat did say to me at one point, to paraphrase, the fastest way to hell is blindly assuming that when a control player is let low life, the game is almost over. However, that doesn't mean it's not worth putting the control opponent at low life, because it limits their options. You're making them like clear and heal on the same turn, which is less likely for them to be able to do. You're making them have to get clears over and over again, potentially. That's why also, if you can get them really low but it's not lethal, you should usually do it anyway, unless you have that there's a specific reason that they'll punish you by like playing ANR and healing to full life or something. Especially if you're not an OTK deck, if you can get them low but it's not lethal, just do it. And play to your outs is not only about not dying. Usually people say play to your outs of like, oh, if you're going to die, is there anything that would save me? Play as if you draw it. If you're running out of stuff and they're turning the corner, is there anything that's lethal? Play as if you're going to draw it or discover it or whatever. So it works the other way as well. What can you do now so that your next top deck is lethal? Also, when you are the beatdown, whether or not you're a control deck or an aggro deck or a mid-range deck, if you're the beatdown in this matchup, if something's the most pressuring play now, then play it now. A lot of learning how to play an aggro deck is learning like what's my ideal early curve. That's kind of what the mulligan tells you. It's not just useful for what do I keep in the mulligan, it's useful for what's my early game plan, because these are the things that I want to have early. And what is the like maximally pressuring play? Because the games are often fast. That's not that there wasn't decision making, it was compressed decision making. And in general, also, you want to pressure because the longer you give a control deck to find answers, the more likely they are to have them. So don't necessarily wait for the perfect board. There are exceptions to maximum pressure now. So one is you have something almost as good, and then that sets up a better turn next turn, because you don't just want to play on this turn, you want to play on next turn. So if it's like, oh, I could play every card in my hand with the coin and get a good board now, but then I'm literally passing next turn. Maybe don't do that. You should also have a good next turn, unless like it wins you the game right now. You also, maybe something's most pressuring, except for there's like an obvious way that they punish you for it, and something else is a little stickier. As long as that other thing that's a little stickier is like also a good play. If this is your only good play and they might punish you for it, make them have it. If you have a like alternative play that's also good, then do that. And then the third exception to maximum pressure now is you've gone off the Smork game plan and your deck has a power spike you need to plan ahead for. So that's like when I was mentioning that I was telling my husband playing Handbuff Paladin, hey, in this particular game, we need to save for a big charge minion with like Sandcastle and like all this stuff. He was like, what are you doing? There's so many things. I like had him play the Sandcastle and then like leave it in location form for like 2 turns, because I'm like, no, really, watch. We're waiting. We're waiting.
Or similarly with the current version of Zarimi Priest, where you have Ceaseless Expanse and you have the ability with Ethereal Oracle and Fly Off the Shelves to clear some pretty sizable boards. So you can kind of switch temporarily into control mode and then just go for an OTK of Ceaseless, Zarimi, and maybe some additional stuff, and then use Vol'jin to swap the Ceaseless with one of the other minions, so you have 2 instances of 15, right?
Yeah. So if you have a specific power spike, and those are always like the most fun aggro decks to play, right? Or ones that like can anything that can swap its game plan around. But if you have a specific thing, you're like, oh, I'm the control in this matchup. I know what power spike I'm playing for. Play toward that power spike. Otherwise, it's a rule of thumb that narrows down your problem space is what's the most pressuring play now that still gives me a good turn next turn.
And again, speaking as the control player, right? Like, if you give a control player time, what they are going to want to do more than anything is draw cards. And drawing cards, the control player drawing cards is bad for you because cards mean clears. So the more time that you give them, if you give them a moment to breathe, they're going to use it to draw cards, and that's going to be the answer to your next board. So the way that you prevent that is by not giving them time to breathe.
Yeah. Or if they have to play things to set up for whatever they're, if they're Wheel Warlock, not that we're seeing a lot of that, but they have to have 8, I guess Wheel Warlock's a bad example. We used to have like Odin Warrior. They had to have 8 mana to play Odin.
Yeah.
So just never let them play Odin. Sometimes there's certain things that they need breathing space to do in order to turn around to their game plan.
And even making them, if they're clearing the board, but they're spending all of their mana to do that, that's not the worst thing in the world for you. Right? Because then you can just rebuild again, and then you're putting them right back on the back foot. It's when they can clear, when they can get like a cheap clear, like what Death Knight does often with like a Threads, right? Where they would, especially before it was nerfed again, where they'd just be able to just like Threads hero power, and then they'd have another 4 or 5 mana to be able to start rebuilding with and get ahead of you. If they can't actually use that clear to flip tempo, then you're fine. Then you're set back a little bit, but then you just start rebuilding and you're right back where you started. And if you can pressure them again, then they can't really take advantage of that. It's only when they can actually use it to flip the board on you and turn that into an actual controlling position that's when you start losing as the aggressive player.
And it helps to kind of know when your clock is. So if you're facing a Dungar Druid, if they play Dungar and they pull Yogg, then they have done that flip the board and clear your board at once. And sometimes they're just going to do that. It was too early. There was no way you could possibly have killed them this fast, and that's just the end of the game. I have the only 2 screenshots that I took this week, because I always kind of like take screenshots of games I might want to talk about in Life and Ladder. The only 2 ones I took this week were incredible boards that were about to be cleared by Dungar Druids.
Moments before disaster.
But if you kind of know when something is coming, then you know a little bit like, can I play towards, should I even bother playing my 6 mana dragon to try to get the Zaremi, or do I just need to like empty my hand now to try and see if I can kill them before they play Dungar? So sometimes you can plan ahead a little bit of when is my kind of line where they might start turning the corner. And then if they do start turning the corner, then you stop it. If you have a deck tracker, you look at your deck tracker, you say, is there anything that I can draw or that I can do that gets me over the line for my last little bit of damage? And if there isn't, you can leave. It's okay. You don't have to wait to die. It's okay. Don't, make an honest assessment of whether there's an out to this game. But if there isn't, like, you're not punishing the control player by making them be in this game where they're winning longer. They're happy to do that. That's also me stealing what Wicked says.
They're not trapped in there with you. You're trapped in there with them.
Speaking of that, just I wrote here, repeat after me, my boards will be cleared. This is something that Hat told me. It's like, no, I think this is the reason why a lot of people don't like playing more aggressive decks, because their boards get cleared. And it is really frustrating when your board gets cleared. You have to expect that your boards will be cleared. If your deck has over-the-top damage, then your job is to get as much chip damage in as possible and then recognize when to flip to the over-the-top board game plan and stop worrying about the board damage. So, like, if you're playing Libram Paladin, at a certain point, you might say, okay, I'm going into Linessa game plan now. I've gotten as much in with I can with my minions. Depends on what you draw. Sometimes maybe you're going into like big minions mode later in the game because you got your Librams of Divinity going. Other times maybe you didn't. So you're like, okay, I'm switching into over the top. I'm going to stop worrying about the board now. I'm going to not use my spells to clear their minions and keep board control. I'm going to use it to kill them. Other times that's not your game plan, right? It's about recognizing what your game plan is after the first few turns of a game. But so if your deck is over the top damage, you expect that eventually you will lose board and then you will win through over the top. If your deck does not have over the top damage and you must win through the board, either because of your draw in this matchup or just because of your deck in general, your job is to balance pressure and reload. So this is where that balancing act of like, don't overcommit when your board is already enough to kill them, but don't hold back like just to hold back, if that makes sense. Like you want to have a board that's pressuring enough that if Wicked's on the other side, he's saying, oh, I have to care about this. But you don't want to have more than that. Like sometimes I'll realize this, if this board sticks, it's lethal. They probably can't heal that much. I played more and now I have no reload. Like you want a board that's like just enough.
The goal is to make me clear, but not make me feel upset about it. Not make me feel happy about it. That's the goal when you're playing that, because there are two kinds of boards. One is which, I really don't want to spend a clear on this, but I feel like I have to. And the other one is, this is going to be great. You don't want it to be the latter. You want it to be the former.
That's part of what is so good about Swarm Shaman right now, is due to the nature of the pirate location and sigil, there are a lot of instances that they can set up where they're going to win if you don't clear their board. And so they just set up a sigil or have a closed location, because those are going to be charge pirates. And so even if you clear, they're going to have more damage coming your way with charge. And that is, that's incredibly frustrating if you're trying to control the board.
I think that they've been building more aggressive decks that do have like recourse if their board is clear. So if you have a deck like that, it might be recourse to the term of some over the top finishing damage. It might be, some sort of alternate win con like Zarimi. It might be some charge or like set up for a next turn cards. But if you have something like that in your deck, then, you can set up situations where you're like, okay, I'm happy either way. They don't clear my board, great. I still have my board. They do clear my board, great. I have a plan for what I'm going to do on the next turn. As long as you're not just like putting out only one little threat at a time, it has to be big enough to be scary. Don't hold back to not have it be scary. This also goes into the knowing your opponent is not just for control decks. I think there's kind of a stereotype of like controlled players really need to know what their opponent's going to do. Some aggro decks are kind of solitary decks. You just play it in a certain way. But a lot of aggro decks, you want to know what they might be able to do in order to better make a sticky board, in order to better be able to count your damage and be like, how much healing might they have, in order to better effectively threaten them into abandoning their plan, what's going to be hard for them to deal with. But remember, you're doing this to better stay on your game plan, not their game plan. You're not reacting to them. You're thinking about what they might have and kind of playing ahead of it. I had two more things here. One is don't be greedy. Value is overrated. Obviously, this depends a little bit on the type of deck that you're playing, but regardless of the type of deck that you're playing, to use another hat maxim, a card in your hand when you lose had no value. So even in a control deck, if you waited for the perfect clear and then you died, that was not a valuable clear card for you. And if you wait for the perfect time to play your Ziliax because you need to have like the biggest board ever as an aggro deck, that's like not how you play Ziliax, because then your board died because you didn't have Ziliax out, and you got less damage because you didn't have Ziliax out. Corollary, if you kill them the turn you run out of cards, it doesn't matter that you didn't have card advantage. So reload is important, but only to the extent, and it is very important. I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to get more draw in my decks, but only to the extent that you use those cards that you drew, or they gave you the options that you needed because you needed to dig for something specific. There are some exceptions where a deck, you have a card that actually must be played for value, like Clergy before the Funnel Cake nerf was the only way to draw in a lot of priest decks, so you were still trying to be as fast as possible, but it was as fast as how can I get value out of this as possible. Other times, if you've listened to any of our Decksplanations, you know that we spend a lot of time for every deck naming at least one card and saying, you don't need the extra value out of this card. Just play it.
Like even Tempo Novice Sapper is correct more often than you would think that it is. I'm not going to say more often than not, but more often than you would think that it's correct. Just to play the 3/2. If it's a 1 mana 3/2 with overload. Yeah, so you're not, obviously you need to plan your curve accordingly, but like, if you can also just get in for 3, are you going to get 3 damage out of the spell damage if you hold it? Depends. Sometimes you would, sometimes you wouldn't.
Yeah, and so that when it depends, partly on what you're playing against. If you are playing Novice Zapper and you're playing against a really aggressive deck, and that 3/2 is going to keep them from getting control of the board and push 3 damage face, then yeah, just play it. Especially if there's nothing else you'd play onto anyway. So we're just going to lead with it. And you might not necessarily need like Finale on a Finale card or that kind of thing. It's really easy to get, in psychology, they call it functional fixedness. So the classic study here is that they gave people a box of tacks and a candle and said, stick this candle to the wall. But the tacks were not long enough to fit through the candle. So people would try like going at an angle and like all these things, and it never really worked. The only thing that worked was if you emptied the tacks out of the box, tacked the box to the wall, and then put the candle on top of it. Which I have to admit I probably would not have thought of. And the point of the researchers was you think of the box as a box that holds tacks, and you forget that it also has other properties. Like it is a physical object that something could sit on. So you want to try to, especially when you're like learning a deck, because it can be hard to think of all this in the middle of a game. But like, what are things that my cards can be used for besides the obvious purpose of why they were put in the deck? And a lot of decks that are like really high skill cap, as we might say, are that way because their cards are used in many different ways. And that's part of what makes them difficult to pilot.
Can I melt the candle to the wall?
Probably. You're only allowed to use the text and the candle, but maybe if you just like hold your hands on it long enough. I don't know. I have really cold hands, so that wouldn't work.
If I squeeze really hard, can I get the candle flat enough?
I feel like you would get credit if you came up with another solution from these from these researchers. I should find the real study and see if anyone came up with another way to do it.
What if you just yelled, take candle and run out?
If I was the researcher, I would give you credit for that. The last thing that I wrote here, and this was I don't know whether Schwal invented this or she got it from somewhere, but it says, spend all your mana on cards that affect the board state. Which reminds me of like the author Michael Pollan has a thing of like, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Spend all your mana on cards that affect the board state. That third one more if you are a proactive deck. But if you're an aggro deck, do not hero power until like turn 5 minimum. Really like until you have to, unless you're Demon Hunter, of course.
Or maybe Hunter. Like Steady Shot is still... It depends. There have been some decks in the past where pressing Steady Shot in the early game to kind of meter out your threats was correct. I think we have enough card draw now that that's not necessarily correct anymore, but that used to be the case with like early Face Hunter. You had to weave in hero powers.
Yeah, which capped out at 3, except for
Yeah.
Leroy.
Right.
Yeah. Generally, don't hero power until you have to. Spend your mana on cards. And the easiest way to help yourself learn how to plan ahead, if you're somebody who has trouble like planning for the next turns, the easiest way to do this is say, how am I spending all my mana this turn, next turn, and ideally the turn after that? And obviously you're going to draw stuff, so that might change your plan. But just the math of like, how do I add up to, let's say it's turn 3, to 3, and then to 4, and then to 5. Or if that's too much, just 3 and 4. Generally, your mana is the resource that you spend to do stuff. So the more mana you spend, the more stuff you are doing on average. So spending all your mana is usually correct, especially if you are in a beatdown roll.
This is the one area of this where if you're playing a control deck, you need to be a little bit less in the letter of the law here, because if you're using a removal for less value than you ought to get out of it, and it's not going to lead to you dying, then sometimes that's not correct. But there are things you can do that are not clearing the board as a control deck, usually. And the other thing that's really helpful for this is kind of figuring out like mini goals throughout the game. Like if you know that you have, say, you want to play Shutter Block on 6 into Incendious on 7 because you're an asteroid shaman, right? Okay, well, the requirements for me for doing that is that you need to not be under threat of death, right? So what are the things that I'm going to do on turns 3, 4, 5 to set up for the fact that I am playing 2 cards that don't immediately affect the board on 6 and 7, right? That may mean getting taunts in the way. It may mean, doing some proactive clears, setting up a clear on 5, making sure to not overload yourself going into turn 6. That's a good one, right? But knowing like that you want to do a particular thing on a particular turn because it's on curve helps you kind of work backwards from that turn to say, what do I need to, what things need to be true for me to be able to do this aside from I have 6 mana? Because it's not always just I have 6 mana. It's usually I have 6 mana and I can do this without dying, which is a very different sentence.
And you haven't overloaded yourself. Maybe you need to save the coin for that. So the coin, the more aggressive the deck you're playing, the more often you want to play it earlier because it's a bigger like percentage of your mana. But don't just play it just to play it. It needs to like smooth out your curve, not make it more awkward. And if there is a particular spike that would really help to be a turn earlier, then like save for that. One example would be if you're playing Handbuff Paladin, don't coin out a 2-drop on 1, coin out your weapon on 3. Right? Like basically always correct in Handbuff Paladin.
Yeah. I mean, in general, like this is with any ramp, but particularly with the coin, is if I coin this out, what am I doing next turn? If the answer is nothing, then it's probably not correct to use the coin there to jump the curve, because the idea of the coin is to smooth out your curve, right? So it's better to take the earlier turns off than the later ones. It's much less harmful to you to take turn 1 off than it is to take turn 3 off or turn 2 off, right? So if you're skipping to turn 2, but you don't actually have another turn 2 play, you probably should just wait and then find a different place to use the coin. We could do a whole episode on coin usage too.
Using the coin?
Yeah.
Yes. There was one time that I knew that my opponent really understood using the coin was when it was a Handbuff Paladin. I was playing like something that had like no spells. I might have also been playing Handbuff. I don't remember. They kept me from using my coin for like 3 turns in a row with neophytes, and it lost the game. Like
that was the World Cup or Hearthstone World Championship last year, right? Or
maybe that's what I'm thinking of. It wasn't me. It was watching the tournament.
It might not have been. I forget if it was World Championship last year or one of the tours earlier this year, but it was like Gamer RBG versus someone else, and they just used Cult Neophyte to obliterate possible use of the coin, and it's like that card's not there for other paladins. It just happened that when you can prevent the opponent from pointing out their Painter's Virtue, you get an advantage in the mirror.
And that just shows, that that player who was playing the Cult Neophytes understood when Gamer RBG was going to be wanting to use his coin, right?
Yep.
And what was his curve going to be? And so that wasn't like a misplay on Gamer RBG's part to be planning to use his coin optimally, but it just shows like how important the coin is. And it was a very clever play to put the Neophyte on there. I think that's what I was thinking of, although it has happened to me that I lost at least one game because I couldn't play my coin. I was like, really? Actually, even today, they neophyted and I couldn't play my coin. It didn't lose me the game, but I'm like, gosh. I was playing. How did you know I wanted to use my coin? Don't just throw the coin away for just what's the best play this turn. Again, you want to, if you're playing an aggro deck, you want to start with what's the most pressuring play, but then think, what's my next turn and my next turn? What's like the maximum pressure over this turn and the next 2 turns if I don't like have lethal? The later it is in the game, the more you're just looking to close it out. Especially if you're still in that beatdown role.
Well,
That's basically what I had written. So
yeah. So enjoy some aggro decks and go check out Worlds. We have many folks we'd like to thank. Check out our thanks section on the website at Concede.com, where you can also find our contact info, our show notes, and our Patreon information. You can monetarily support our show at patreon.com/CoinConcede. Join us every live by following us on Twitch at twitch.coinconcede.com, join our community chats in our Discord at discord.coinconcede.com, and write into our email at coinconcede@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky at CoinConcede, and if you'd like some CC swag, head on over to our shop at shop.coinconcede.com. I guess, are we still posting anything to Twitter?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Yeah.
I post to both. So, I mean, the show posts to both. I don't post very much to Twitter anymore, but the show posts to both.
Blue Sky exclusive.
Yeah.
Come over. So I am going to concede to my lovely co-hosts for covering for me last week, and Wicked for editing this week, because I'm going to be busy with casting stuff, both in terms of doing the job and making sure I know what the heck I'm talking about with regards to new decks being played. And then concede as well, since I missed it last week, to the Hearthstone community team for the Great Dark Beyond boxes. They were pretty sweet. It took me a moment to realize exactly how to get everything working. I'm grateful that the headphone stand that lights up is not like required to be USB plugged in at all times. It just needs to be charged.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have it plugged in all the time, but I didn't actually realize it had a battery in it.
Yeah, it's great because I definitely don't have enough USB ports otherwise to fit my whole setup. So, yeah, that's cool. I just sort of, in general, prefer the setting that like rotates between a bunch of colors. So I did that, and then I figured out how to do that for the mouse pad as well. And that means that I can I was able to free up the mouse pad that I was using to go into my laptop bag. So that's handy.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, I will concede to the world's players and casters, especially our own Edelweiss. And also, I'm glad you were feeling better. And I will also concede to Hat, because I learned a lot of the Decksplanations advice here from him, and stole a lot of phrases from him. So I will give attribution now. Didn't have in-text citations for all of them, but just blanket citation. Very much appreciated learning a lot about aggro from him over the years, and from many of the other people in the community as well.
And I'm going to concede to my oldest daughter, who about 15 minutes before we started recording found out that she got into the college that she applied to early decision. So
Yay!
We are very proud of her, and also very relieved that we do not have to deal with any more college admission stuff for the rest of the year. We just have to figure out how the hell we're paying for it, but that's a different discussion that we'll get through. But yeah, it's we're really proud of her. I mean, she's wanted to go. It's the same school that Maureen and I went to, and she fell in love with it, and so also she's going to be not too far away, which is nice. I'm also going to concede to both of you for taking pity on me and keeping the episode under 2 hours on a week that I have to edit because Edel is casting. and I will concede to Mad at Arms for helping me test out my shiny new ancient copper dragon in Commander this week. He knows what he did. But that's going to do it for us for this week. So until next time, keep calm and don't be salty. Just hit them in the head. And if you see us on ladder, concede.
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 All life must end. I yield for now. I concede. Well fought. I concede.
You
this one.
The victory is yours.
You have bested me.
I give up.
You win this one, friend. You win this time. I choose death.